United States Department of Agriculture.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Jesse. It was a kind introduction. And also thanks to the organizers for putting together such a great symposium. I have to tell you, I was very excited getting the invitation to speak because of all the venture and project topics that are part of my daily diet. This particular subject, animal and non-animal methods, infuse my conversations more than anything else. The views I express in this presentation are entirely mine and may not reflect those of the persons and entities who are listed on this slide. I would like to acknowledge helpful support from the Borough's Welcome Fund for some past work, which is related to part of the content of this presentation. I became interested in this area a long time ago and first publicly addressed it in 2015 when the Journal of Medical Ethics published Reforming the Politics of Animal Research. It was an article I co-authored with Bill Reppy, who's now a chair emeritus professor at Duke Law. And it was our response to the reposted perspective of an NIH official on the NIH Office of Extramural Research website. And in that post, she warned, and I want to read this so I get it correct, the scientific community of increasing calls to action from animal rights activists urged research institutions to be prepared for the unexpected and hope that there wouldn't be a need to deploy any counterterrorism plan that would have been developed by these institutions. When I read her post, it sparked memories and brought me back to my Hopkins fellowship many years earlier. I spent that in the institution's most heavily NIH-funded laboratory. Our leader directed a large research program and was prominently in the crosshairs of anti-animal research sentiments. He was also the chair of the AWIC and demonstrated, to me at least, a significant interest in animal welfare. Before we leave the screen, I want you to take a look at the left side here by my pointer. The review process for this piece was not easy. The editor was very pleasant. We submitted it in August of 2012, and he shared with me there was quite a bit of what he called to and froing among the editorial staff about what to do with it, because they considered it such a hot button topic. Eventually, they did call for a revision, which we sent to them. And that's a little over 2 years later. And then finally, 2.5 years total, just about, the piece was accepted and it was published. And that's certainly, I think, a great metric for what communication about animal research was in the second decade of the 21st century. So I brought my background as an investigator and as a veterinarian, heavily invested in animal welfare, to the piece. Bill, just a super co-author, and brought such intellectual depth to the legal aspects of the piece, and also obviously had some animal welfare interests. Our position was to respectfully recommend that research institutions might pick up these three research policies, not because we were looking for them to appease animal rights activists, but because we felt the policies being broadly received as morally right and did or would reflect a majority view of the stakeholders. So here are the three policies. Use an animal alternative if it's available rather than an animal. Be transparent with the public about animal use in the institution and provide them with some detailed information about that use. Now, of course, if somebody's got the newest, greatest molecule or a gizmo, it's very reasonable to make some redactions. And last year, to have a willingness to speak with the animal welfare, animal protection community about their concerns about the use of animals in research. And that is something that requires then and now and in future a constructive engagement between responsible folks from the institution and from the protection community, I do want to make 2 points about this last bullet here. The use of negotiate was not in anticipation of any belligerence from the institution or from the animal protection community. It's that Bill is a legal scholar and understandings are negotiated. And the second point is that welfare is part of the institutional construct. And although it's not protecting animals from being used as experimental subjects, it still is a jump off point for communication. We ended the article by asking the institutions, you accept 1 or 3 of these recommendations, please publish them in a way that makes it easy for interested people to find, maybe a big box policy on animals on the web page. It's about 10 years since Bill and I wrote the article, and I'd like to use the rest of this talking space to update our recommendations to include non-animal methods. Some folks call them new approach. Others will say NAMs. Simplest definition of a NAM is a technology, method, or approach not using a whole animal. Some folks prefer saying new approach methods. Some say non-animals methods, some say NAMs. I use all 3, but I have noted that there are some individuals who have a sensitivity about the use of non-animal methods. For what it's worth, coming from someone who has worked and has a background in animal-based research, when an animal is involved in a protocol, I'll say an animal model. If I'm focusing on an animal-free method, I say non-animal method or a NAM. It's what they are. It's an animal method or it's a non-animal method. When you work with animals, you have already explained why you're working with animals. And if you work with NAMs, you've probably similarly proposed a justification for that use too. If someone or someones are questioning why you need or even prefer using an animal method, a non-animal method, or both, tell them. And then have a conversation about it. We work in science and we value accurate terminology and honesty. I encourage you to describe these methods for what they are. They're animal methods, they're non-animal methods or NAMs. And I'm not trying to complicate the linguistics, but new approach methods, in my view, could just as easily refer to a revised animal protocol as they could to a novel non-animal method. But that's really a point to discuss another day. I'm going to leave it there for now. Let's take a look at some of these NAMs. In chemical assays, there are no human or animal cells involved, strictly measuring reactivity between a chemical and the substance. And that substance could be another chemical or maybe an isolated portion of a macromolecule. In silico, that's the computer as a predictive tool. Humans are making the decision. And for that reason, I separated AI from in silico because some people differentiate AI automating and assuming the human decision-making role. And then we have these in vitro methods. Cells in 2D systems, they grow and live their lives as monolayers in plastic and glass dishes under static conditions. 3D organ systems are also known as microphysiological systems, or MPS. The FDA gives us a definition here. I will leave you to read that yourself. And they are available in increasing levels of complexity. The spheroid is the entry level. The organoid is an upgrade to mid-class, and then you can go real fancy schmancy with the organ on a chip. I do want to pause here a moment to say that I've heard objections to spheroids and organoids being included in the MPS club, and I've also heard objections to excluding them from it. For this presentation, I'm keeping them in, and at the same time, I'm going to apologize to investigators if I've unintentionally demeaned their spheroid and organoid. I didn't mean to do that. Every level of sophistication is important and it has a purpose. And spheroids and organoids are real champs. I only refer to level of complexity. So on this little bit of a disoriented map, I put it up because as I was thinking of MPS inclusivity, it reminded me of a viewpoint, unfortunately held by too many, living in 4 of the 5 boroughs of New York City. These are the 5 boroughs of New York City here. And they look at Staten Island, that's my hometown, which is the smallest of the 5, and laughably try to deny that we belong to the city, and they consider us the forgotten borough. But despite whatever good-natured ridicule, if you could call it that, there is, the rest of the world looks at Brooklyn with its famous and very beautiful bridge, the Bronx having the Yankees. I don't follow professional sports, but if you live in New York City, trust me, you're not going to escape the Yankees. Or Queens, which was the site of a World's Fair. The rest of the world doesn't look at them, or Staten Island for that matter, as the city. They look at Manhattan, Big Apple, as New York City. That's a photo of Tiffany's flagship store on Fifth Avenue, and that's probably where the organ on a chip, I suppose, is hanging out. Well, the spheroids and organoids are with me over here on Staten Island. But honestly, when any of us in these 4 boroughs talk about going into the city, we're also talking about Manhattan. So maybe it really is just an unfortunate nomenclature problem that the MPS field is having too, and that's going to be something for the scientists to resolve. I'm not going to handle that today, but regardless of their complexity level, with or without microfluidic flow or plus minus external forces applied to them. And by the way, Dr. Jacquot had an excellent one-stop shopping presentation yesterday. It was absolutely lovely. If you want to learn about NAMs, that if you're going to pick one presentation here, that's the good one to get the basics. All of these models are extraordinary miniaturizations of certain pathophysiological and physiological states, but there are still certain matters that need to be resolved before they can universally replace animals in research and safety testing. And I've wanted to know how that's going to happen. My day job involves trying to find alternatives to the use of whole animals in some specific neuroscience, cardiology, and renal research, when my interest in alternatives, that is, expanded to include NAMs, I sought the opinions of experts for how could they be developed and obtain regulatory approval and be, achieve primetime roles in research and safety testing. So I was delighted when the Boroughs Wellcome Fund provided support for a roundtable series about this subject, and we convened those in 2022. Here's how we did it. These are the 8 stakeholder groups who I identify as most closely related to animal research and to the development, regulatory approval, and implementation of NAMs. I was very fortunate to have some of the A+ team from each of these groups sit in one place, and we did it twice because there are 2 roundtables, to do a deep dive into their comfort and discomfort level with NAMs. Such smart people, outstanding conversation, and it really was my privilege and pleasure to moderate those discussions. So other than what we talked about, it was with a candor that really was wonderful, and it yielded such important information in a short time. For that reason alone, I'd like to reprise that format as soon as I can. When we have a common language evolving and we develop the action items to move forward, it's going to be much more easily done. But that doesn't mean that it's going to happen without, some obstacles. That's just the way of life. What's going to be critical here is that each of the stakeholders is patient with the others as they're learning languages that are not their native tongue. And it's going to be crucial to scientific interests, whether we're talking about animal methods or we're talking about non-animal or new approach NAM methods, whatever you prefer to call them, to have these ongoing conversations. And it's important for patient interests and for animal interests as well. As a follow-up to the roundtables, Dr. Lou Muglia, who is the Burroughs Wellcome CEO, and I co-authored this piece, which was published in 2022, and it included three important questions. Has animal research helped advance our understanding of basic physiology and pathophysiology, reliably identified toxic substances, and advanced human and healthcare? Or has it diverted resources from developing what might have become more reliable investigative methods, in other words, NAMs, that might be better for predicting positive or negative healthcare outcomes? And last, what person or persons is going to pronounce judgment on the value of NAMs? So, well, the roundtables in my article with Lou, who was also a great co-author, addressed the value of non-animal and animal methods. My participation last December at a National Academies roundtable focused on improving scientists' communication with the public. And there were 3 slides from that time which are relevant to the internal institutional communications about which I'm speaking today. Science is hard. We can all agree on that. Dr. Trapikar works with microphysiological systems at Laboratory of Human Biomimetics at the Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital. His comment is quite an interesting one, yes, coming from an AM scientist, but he provided me with an excellent rationale. Maybe we don't yet understand enough about the diseases we're studying. That's a yes. And having said that, I think we can also agree that there are reproducibility and translatability problems associated with animal use. Science is hard to everybody's health. Dr. Berich is the principal at B2 Pathology Solutions, and his statement is a supremely practical one. I can always count on him for that. And I think this should be one of the science is hard communications we have among ourselves where we're figuring out what constitutes best science. Animal use, NAMs, combination of them. This slide updates some of what Bill Reppy and I wrote in 2015, and I'm not going to give you the dramatic reading of Policy Box 2.0, but I'll just say that it notes the importance of having institutional conversations. And these are the 3 recommended updates. Not all investigators are familiar with NAMs, and training information should be provided to them. And in that demographic, I'm going to include faculty, graduate students, and fellows. IACUCs and IOs, especially the members who are not scientists, also need to receive the training information. And in terms of delivering those resources, there are some great ones. 3RC, which is a 3Rs collaborative in the United States. NC3Rs is a similar group across the pond in the UK. NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences at NIH, has a great website. CAT at Hopkins, and the IQ-MPS affiliate. That's a pharma biotech collaboration within the International Consortium for Innovation and Quality in Pharmaceutical Development. We call it IQ-MPS for short. There are others too, if you Google them or if you look up microphysiological methods. I've also spoken with a colleague, Dr. Steve Nemi, who is formerly the director of animal resources at Massachusetts General Hospital and at Boston University, about what it would look like to develop NAMS relevant webinars for these groups. And I'm thinking IACUC 2.0 sounds good. I'm going to ask you, please don't steal that before it gets trademarked. But I'm socializing the idea here because it really is going to take a village to put together these webinars and link materials. In the meantime, you can check out these resources, Google, other things on the internet, and I'm sure your institution has some friendly NAMS investigators who can help those who are unfamiliar with the science to better understand it. This last edition is an outstanding idea from Dr. Cindy Buckmaster, who's formerly the director for the Center for Comparative Medicine at Baylor and presently is the host of Get Real, which is a podcast having open discussions about animal research. The article that Bill Reppy and I wrote recommended the need for institutional transparency with the public. Cindy's construct is recommending institutional stakeholders having clarity among themselves. And she based that on a model for centers that the NIH funds at many medical schools across the country, Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. And what they do is they focus on translating basic research discoveries into research with humans. So the Institute for Scientific Rigor and Animal Welfare does the same thing, just in a different way. And you can see that what she's recommended goes beyond an accepted or expected code of conduct and includes these departments, which are meant to be additional layers of animal welfare and scientific scrutiny. I think they're very helpful. And yes, it's probably going to be more time and more money, but maybe if there are conversations with NIH and other funders, maybe everybody's going to be arguing for its establishment. So I had the model at the Borough's Welcome Roundtables for stakeholder conversations. And within the institution, these are the stakeholder groups, I believe, who should be involved. The investigators working with animals, with NAMS, or with both, AWIC members, and institutional officials. And to begin the conversation, just like we did at the Borough's Welcome Fund Roundtables, is identifying the pain points for each of the demographics. Collegiality is going to be necessary to develop action items, to go to the next steps, and also to identify shared problems and try to resolve misunderstandings. Eventually, there'll be a design to move forward, and it's going to be a dynamic conversation. Just acquiring knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that we're moving forward. We may actually get stopped in our tracks with a big old "you are wrong" sign, and then we need to go back, whatever number of the needed steps are, to identify the error or errors that we made, and again, move forward. Remember, science is hard, and we're human, and we're not perfect. I enjoy the New Yorker magazine, and I'd like to tell a story, and it is not a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there were two colleagues, and they were close, and unfortunately had a large misunderstanding. He did not speak to her, nor did he respond to her for 2 weeks, and that did make her very sad. But eventually, reason and compassion were following behind and eventually overtook the upset. So communications were restored, and they did work happily ever after. But seriously, there's a lot at stake with the institutional conversations that I'm recommending. Whether you favor animal methods, you advocate NAMS, you're an AWIC member who's trying to figure this all out and discern the value of each method, or an IO who's not a scientist, please don't come to a conversation with a figurative sword in your hand or a dragon leashed at your side. As Steve Nemi says, we can disagree. Let's just not be disagreeable. So in your internal communications, be clear, be patient, and be kind. Addressing the animal research controversy is going to involve a long conversation, but it should not be endless. Cindy Buckmaster is very correct in saying animals lose everything for us. And I'm very sure you share my response that we must do everything for them. And part of that is walking the talk about having the most human relevant methodologies provided by humane and results-oriented science. Whether you advocate animal methods, non-animal methods, or you choose to blend both of them, scientific integrity deserves these conversations. So do the patients, and for sure, so do the animals. It would take a number of slides for me to put up the proper acknowledgments. So I'm going to abbreviate what would take me a long time to say, simply just to offer my gratitude to so many people who over decades of my professional life have provided me with the information and the guidance for conducting animal research, and much more recently about these new approach non-animal methods, or NAMs. I do encourage you, please look into them. They are fascinating and a very relevant science, and they're part of our future. So my contact information is on the slide, as well as of the organizations I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Please contact me if you want to chat some more. I would, and I hope that you do too.
USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.